The desert doesn't forgive, and it doesn't forget. Caleb Holt learned that truth the day he found a child sitting beside an abandoned well, her dress caked in dust, her eyes fixed on the empty horizon like she was watching for ghosts. She'd been there 3 days without food, 4 without her parents, and still she waited with the kind of faith that breaks a man's heart. When he asked who she was waiting for, her answer came in a whisper that cut deeper than any knife. Mama said they'd come back. The silence that followed told him everything. No one was coming. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Lily's story travels. And if her journey moves you, hit that like button. Now, let me tell you how one question by a well changed 2 lives forever. The sun hung low over the New Mexico territory like a copper coin melting into the earth, casting long shadows across the desert scrubland that stretched toward mountains so distant they seemed like memories. Caleb Holt rode with the kind of weariness that came not from the miles behind him, but from the years, 43 of them, most spent alone on land that demanded everything and gave back only what a man could wrestle from it. His ranch lay another hour north, but his horse needed water, and so did he. The old stone well at the crossroads had served travelers for decades, built by Spanish missionaries long before the territory had a name, before the railroad had carved through the wilderness bringing fortune seekers and trouble in equal measure. Caleb had stopped there 100 times, maybe more. He knew every crack in the weathered stones, every rut in the dusty trail that forked in 4 directions like the choices a man faced when he didn't know which way was home. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that this time would be different. She sat on the far side of the well, small and still as a prairie flower that had somehow taken root in impossible ground. At first, Caleb thought she might be a trick of the light, the way heat sometimes conjured visions that disappeared when a man got close. But as his horse ambled forward, the girl remained solid, real, her narrow shoulders hunched forward, her hands folded in her lap with careful precision. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Her dress had once been blue, he thought, though the dust had claimed most of the color. Dark hair hung in tangles past her shoulders, and her feet were bare, scratched and sun-darkened. She didn't look up when his horse stopped, didn't move at all, except for the slow rise and fall of breathing. Caleb dismounted, his boots hitting packed earth with a sound that seemed too loud in the stillness. He tied his horse to the well post and removed his hat, running his fingers through graying hair that stuck to his scalp in the heat. The girl still hadn't acknowledged him. "Evening, miss," he said quietly, keeping his distance the way a man might approach a frightened animal. Her head lifted slowly, and when her eyes met his, something in Caleb's chest tightened. They were brown, those eyes, deep and solemn, and they held the kind of old sorrow that shouldn't exist in someone so young. She studied him with careful assessment, like she was measuring whether he represented hope or threat, whether speaking might cost her something she couldn't afford to give. "I don't mean any harm," Caleb continued, his voice gentle. "Just stopping for water. You waiting on someone?" The question seemed to unlock something. The girl nodded, her gaze drifting back toward the eastern trail, the one that led toward the railroad town of Socorro, 30 miles distant through unforgiving country. "How long have you been here?" Caleb asked. 3 days, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, thin as smoke. "Maybe 4. I lose count when it gets dark." The words hit Caleb like a physical blow. 3 days. 4. He glanced around at the emptiness that surrounded them, at the absence of any shelter, any supplies, any sign that someone had planned for a child to survive here. The desert at night dropped to temperatures that could kill. The days brought sun that could do worse. "You alone?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. She nodded again. "You got a name?" "Lily Mae Carter." She said it with careful pronunciation, like it was important to get it right, like her name might be the only thing she had left that couldn't be taken away. "Lily Mae," Caleb repeated, settling into a crouch several feet from where she sat. His knees protested, they always did, but he ignored them. "That's a pretty name. I'm Caleb. Caleb Holt. I've got a ranch north of here, about an hour's ride." She absorbed this information without comment, her eyes returning to the trail. "Lily Mae," Caleb said gently. "Who are you waiting for?" "My mama and papa." The words came with such simple certainty that Caleb felt something break inside him. They had to go get help. Our wagon broke and Papa said the wheel was too damaged to fix without proper tools. Mama said they had to leave me here because I'd slow them down, but they promised they'd come back. Papa promised. Caleb looked at the well, at the stones that held no wagon tracks, no evidence of recent travel beyond his own. He looked at the trails branching in 4 directions, at the dust that told its own story. No one had passed this way in days. No one except this small girl, alone with her faith and her father's promise. When did they leave? He asked. Morning time. The sun was still low. She pointed toward the eastern horizon. Papa said to wait right here, not to move for anything, so they could find me easy when they came back. Which morning, Lily May? She frowned, confusion crossing her features. The morning after we stopped. And that was 3 days ago? 4? Her certainty wavered. I think so. It's hard to remember. I fell asleep, and when I woke up, it was dark. And then it was light again. And then dark. And then... She stopped, her small hands twisting in the fabric of her dress. They're coming back. Papa promised. Caleb's jaw tightened. He'd seen enough of the territory to know its truths, and none of them were kind. Parents didn't leave children by wells to fetch tools. They left children when the burden of keeping them alive became too great, when another mouth to feed meant the difference between survival and starvation, when love lost its battle against desperation. He'd heard stories. The railroad had brought waves of settlers unprepared for the harsh reality of desert life. Families fell apart. Choices were made. And children were the ones who paid the price, left behind with promises that were easier to make than keep. But he couldn't tell her that, couldn't take away the hope that kept her small heart beating. You hungry? He asked instead. Lily May's eyes flickered to him, then away. A little. When's the last time you ate? Papa left me some bread and an apple. She gestured toward a cloth bundle near the base of the well. I tried to make it last. Caleb picked up the bundle, unfolding fabric that had once been part of a woman's shawl. Inside were crumbs, nothing more. The apple core sat beside it, brown with age, every bit of flesh stripped down to the seeds. This child had eaten perhaps 2 meals in 4 days, rationing with the discipline of someone who understood scarcity in ways no child should. Lily May, he said carefully, I've got beef jerky in my saddlebag, some hardtack too. Not fancy, but it'll fill your belly. Would you take some? She hesitated, and in that hesitation, Caleb saw the calculation. Would accepting food mean she'd given up on her parents' return? Would eating break the promise she'd made to wait? Your papa would want you to eat, Caleb said softly. Can't come back to a girl who's faded away to nothing. That logic seemed to reach her. She nodded slowly. Caleb retrieved his supplies, settling back onto the ground near the well, but not too close, giving her space. He laid out jerky, hardtack, and a canteen of water. Help yourself, take what you need. Lily May approached like a desert fox, wary and watchful. She took a piece of jerky, examining it before taking the smallest bite possible. The moment the salt and smoke hit her tongue, something changed. Her eyes closed, and she chewed slowly, making that single bite last as long as possible. Go on, Caleb encouraged. There's plenty. She ate another piece, then another, each one disappearing with careful precision. She drank from the canteen in small sips, the way someone who'd known terrible thirst had learned to manage water. Caleb watched her, this tiny creature with her old eyes and her unshakable faith, and felt anger building in his chest, not at her, but at the people who'd left her here, at the circumstances that forced impossible choices, at a world that could be so casually cruel. You live alone at your ranch? Lily May asked between bites, her voice stronger now with food in her belly. I do. Your wife died? The directness caught him off guard, but he supposed children who'd faced what she'd faced didn't have time for careful conversation. She did. 7 years back. Fever took her one winter. Do you got children? No. The word came harder than it should. We weren't blessed that way. Lily May nodded, processing this. So you're alone. That's right. Is it hard, being alone? Caleb met her eyes, those solemn brown eyes that had seen too much. Sometimes, but you get used to it, learn to carry your own weight. I'm good at being quiet, Lily May said suddenly, urgently, like she was making her case for something. I don't need much. I can work. Papa taught me to fetch water and gather kindling, and I know how to check eggs for cracks. I'm real useful. The desperation beneath her words made Caleb's throat tight. This child was trying to sell herself, trying to prove her value like a piece of livestock at market, because somewhere deep down, beneath the faith in her father's promise, she knew no one was coming. Lily May, Caleb said carefully, those are fine skills, but you don't need to prove anything to me. I just mean I wouldn't be trouble if you needed help at your ranch. I appreciate that. He paused, choosing his words like stepping stones across a river. It's getting toward dark. Desert gets cold at night, and there's coyotes that come down from the hills. Snakes, too, looking for warm rocks. Fear flickered across her face, quickly suppressed. I've got a spare room at my ranch, Caleb continued. Hasn't been used in years, but it's got a bed and a blanket and a door that locks. You could spend the night there, get some proper food in you, and in the morning, we could come back here. Together. Wait for your folks in daylight, when it's safer. Lily May's internal struggle played across her features. Papa said not to move. I understand, but Papa couldn't have known you'd be waiting this long, and I don't think he'd want you out here in the cold and dark, not if there was a warm bed nearby. What if they come back tonight and I'm not here? Then they'll find you at my ranch come morning. I'll leave word at the Socorro post office that you're with me, so if they make inquiries, they'll know where to find you. The lie came easily, necessary. There would be no inquiries. Lily May looked toward the eastern trail one more time, hope and doubt warring in her expression. The sun had nearly disappeared now, the light bleeding out of the sky like a wound. The temperature was already dropping. Just one night, Caleb said quietly. That's all I'm asking. One night where you're safe and fed and warm. Then we'll come back first thing tomorrow. The silence stretched between them, filled with the sound of wind moving through sage and the distant call of a hawk. Finally, Lily May stood, brushing dust from her dress in a gesture that was heartbreakingly careful, dignified despite everything. Just one night, she agreed, her voice small but steady. Then we come back. Then we come back, Caleb confirmed, though the promise felt like broken glass in his mouth. The ride north to the ranch took longer than usual, Caleb having settled Lily May in front of him on the saddle, his arm loose around her middle to keep her steady. She sat rigid at first, unused to the proximity, unused to the motion of the horse, but as the miles passed and exhaustion claimed its due, she began to lean back against him, her small body finally allowing itself rest. Caleb tried to remember the last time he'd held a child. Years ago, maybe decades. His wife had wanted them desperately, had prayed for them, had mourned each month that passed without the blessing of new life. After she'd died, the emptiness of the ranch had seemed fitting, like the house itself was in mourning. He'd grown accustomed to the silence, to the absence of small footsteps and laughter. He'd built walls around the hurt until he couldn't feel it anymore, until alone became not just his circumstance but his identity. Now this slip of a girl was breaking through those walls with nothing more than her presence, her weight against his chest, a reminder of everything he'd convinced himself he didn't need. The ranch appeared as the last light faded, a sturdy house built from adobe and timber, corrals spreading out behind it, a barn that had weathered 20 years of desert storms. It wasn't much, but it was paid for, earned through sweat and stubbornness. Caleb had built most of it himself, his wife beside him in the early years, painting the shutters blue because she'd said every home needed color. The blue had faded now, like everything else. He dismounted, then reached up to lift Lily May down. She weighed nothing, bird bones and determination. She stood in the yard, looking at the house with an expression he couldn't quite read. Come on inside, Caleb said, leading his horse to the barn. I'll get him settled, then we'll see about getting you cleaned up and fed proper. Lily May followed him into the barn, watching as he removed the saddle and bridle as he brushed the horse down with practiced strokes. She didn't speak, but her presence filled the space, her eyes taking in every detail. The hay bales stacked against the wall, the tack hanging on its pegs, the lantern casting shadows that danced with the rhythm of the horse's breathing. You know how to handle horses? Caleb asked. A little. We had a mule. Before. Before what? Before everything broke. The words carried weight beyond their simplicity. Caleb didn't press. He finished with the horse, checked the water trough, and led Lily May toward the house. Inside, the ranch house was spare but clean. Caleb had never been one for decoration, but he kept things orderly, dishes washed, floors swept, furniture arranged with purpose rather than style. The main room held a table, chairs, a stone fireplace that dominated one wall. A kitchen area occupied the back corner, shelves lined with supplies bought in bulk from the general store in Socorro. 2 doors led off the main room, one to Caleb's bedroom, one to the spare room that had been meant for children who never came. "Bathroom's out back," Caleb said, "but there's a basin here for washing up." He poured water from a pitcher into a ceramic bowl, setting it on the table. "I'll get a fire going, warm the place up." Lily May approached the basin like it was a luxury, dipping her hands into the water with reverence. She washed her face, her neck, her arms up to the elbows, the water turning brown with accumulated dust. When she finished, she looked almost like a different child, still thin, still worn, but more defined, more present. Caleb had started the fire, flames beginning to catch and spread. He moved to the kitchen area, pulling out supplies, beans, bacon, cornbread mix. "You like beans?" "Yes, sir." "Don't call me sir, Caleb's fine." "Yes, She stumbled over his name, like using it without a title felt presumptuous. "Yes, Caleb." He cooked while she sat at the table, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes following his movements. He could feel her watching him, could sense the questions she wasn't asking, the observations she was making. Children who'd been left learned to read people, to anticipate moods, to make themselves valuable or invisible depending on what the moment required. The meal came together quickly, beans with bacon, cornbread cooked in a cast-iron skillet, coffee for him, and water for her. He set it on the table, portions generous, then settled into the chair across from her. "Eat up," he said. "Take as much as you want." Lily May stared at the food, at the abundance of it, and something in her expression crumbled. Her eyes filled with tears that she tried desperately to blink back, her small hands clenching into fists on the table. "Hey now," Caleb said gently. "What's wrong?" "It's too much," she whispered. "What if it's gone tomorrow? What if I eat it all and then there's nothing?" The question revealed the architecture of her fear. The comfort was temporary, that fullness was a trick, that anything given could be taken away just as quickly. She'd learned to live on crumbs because crumbs were reliable. Abundance was dangerous because it bred hope, and hope was the thing that hurt most when it died. "Lily May," Caleb said, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't quite name. "There's more food in that pantry than I can eat in 6 months. And when it runs low, I go to town and buy more. That's how it works. You don't need to ration. You don't need to save some for tomorrow. Tomorrow will take care of itself." She looked at him, doubt and longing warring in her expression. "I promise you," he continued, "there will be food tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. For as long as you're under this roof, you don't go hungry. That's my word." Something in his tone reached her. She picked up her spoon, took a small bite of beans, then another. Within minutes, she was eating with the focused intensity of someone who'd learned that food was not guaranteed, each bite precious, each mouthful a gift. Caleb ate slowly, watching her, this small, fierce girl who'd waited by a well because she'd been told to, who'd rationed an apple core across 4 days, who'd offered her usefulness like a payment for the basic dignity of shelter. When the meal was finished, her plate scraped clean, the cornbread reduced to crumbs she pressed her finger against to collect, Caleb cleared the dishes and led her to the spare room. It was small, furnished with only a bed, a chest of drawers, and a chair. Dust coated every surface. Caleb grabbed a rag, wiping down the furniture in quick, efficient strokes, while Lily May stood in the doorway. "There's a blanket in the chest," he said, opening the top drawer to reveal quilts his wife had made, folded with care and untouched for 7 years. He pulled one out, shaking it free of must and memory, spreading it across the bed. "Should keep you warm enough. If you need anything in the night, I'm just through that door." Lily May entered the room slowly, running her hand along the quilt's edge. "This is mine? For tonight?" "That's right." "The whole bed?" The question broke something in Caleb's chest. "The whole bed. You can spread out if you want, roll around, take up as much space as you like." She climbed onto the bed with careful movements, sitting cross-legged on top of the quilt. She looked impossibly small in the space, a child-sized hole in a world built for adults. "Caleb?" she said quietly. "Yeah?" "Thank you for the food and the bed and for not being mean." He had to clear his throat before he could speak. "You don't need to thank me for basic decency, Lily May. Some people aren't decent. No, some people aren't. Are you?" The question was direct, searching. She was asking something deeper than courtesy. She was asking if he could be trusted, if this moment of safety was real or just another promise that would break with morning light. "I try to be," Caleb said honestly. "Don't always succeed, but I try." She nodded, processing this. "We'll go back to the well tomorrow? First thing?" "First thing," he confirmed, the lie bitter on his tongue. "Okay." She lay down, pulling the quilt over herself, her dark hair spreading across the pillow. "Good night, Caleb." "Good night, Lily May." He left the door cracked open, not closed enough to trap her, not open enough to make her feel exposed, and returned to the main room. The fire had burned down to coals, casting a soft red glow across the space. Caleb sank into his chair, exhaustion settling into his bones like dust. He'd promised to take her back to the well. He'd promised because it was the only way to get her somewhere safe, to give her food and warmth and a night's rest without breaking her faith entirely. But come morning, when they returned to that empty crossroads, he'd have to help her face a truth no child should bear, that sometimes love wasn't enough, that sometimes people left, that promises were made by desperate voices and broken by impossible circumstances. And then what? Take her to Socorro, hand her over to the marshal who'd send her to an orphanage in Santa Fe? Leave her in a system that would see her as one more burden, one more mouth to feed in a territory that barely had enough for its own? The thought made his stomach turn. But keeping her wasn't simple either. He was a single man, a rancher with no wife, no family, no proof that he'd be anything more than another person who'd eventually let her down. The territory would ask questions, people would talk, and Lily May deserved more than a man who'd grown comfortable with loneliness, who'd built walls so thick he'd forgotten how to let anyone through. Caleb sat in the darkness, listening to the sound of the fire dying, listening to the silence from the spare room where a small girl slept, probably for the first time in days, and tried to figure out what the right answer was. The desert didn't give easy answers. It never had. But sometimes, Caleb thought as sleep finally claimed him in his chair, sometimes the right thing wasn't easy. Sometimes it was just necessary. And sometimes a man's measure wasn't found in the comfort he sought, but in the promises he chose to keep, even when they cost him everything he'd built to protect himself from exactly this kind of pain. Tomorrow would come soon enough. Tomorrow, by the well, truth would have its reckoning. And Caleb Holt would have to decide what kind of man he wanted to be. Dawn came cold and pale, the kind of light that revealed more than it promised. Caleb woke in his chair, his neck stiff, his back protesting the night spent upright. The fire had died completely, leaving only ash and the faint smell of smoke. For a moment he couldn't remember why he'd slept there instead of in his bed, and then memory returned with the weight of a stone, the girl, the well, the promise he'd made. He stood slowly, joints cracking, and moved toward the spare room. The door remained as he'd left it, cracked open just enough. He peered through the gap and saw Lily May still asleep, curled into a tight ball at the very edge of the bed, as if even in rest she was trying to take up as little space as possible. The quilt had been pulled up to her chin, and her breathing came steady and deep. Caleb let her sleep. He moved to the kitchen area, building up the fire, setting coffee to boil, pulling out flour and eggs for breakfast. His hands worked through familiar motions while his mind circled the problem he'd been avoiding all night. What would happen when they returned to the well and found it still empty, still abandoned, still holding nothing but dust and broken promises? The smell of bacon frying must have woken her. He heard movement from the spare room, the soft pad of bare feet on wooden floors, and then she appeared in the doorway, her hair tangled from sleep, her dress wrinkled, but her eyes clear and alert. "Morning," Caleb said, keeping his voice gentle. "Morning." She hesitated at the threshold, uncertain whether she was allowed to enter fully into the space. "Come sit. Breakfast is almost ready." She moved to the table, settling into the same chair she'd occupied the night before. Caleb plated eggs and bacon, thick slices of bread toasted over the fire, and set it in front of her along with a cup of milk he'd kept cool in the cellar. "Real eggs," Lily May said softly, staring at the plate like it was something holy. "From my chickens out back, laid fresh yesterday." She ate with the same focused intensity as the night before, but slower this time, savoring rather than surviving. Caleb watched her between bites of his own breakfast, this small presence that had upended his careful solitude in the span of a single evening. "You sleep all right?" he asked. "Yes, sir. I mean, Caleb." She corrected herself quickly, anxiously. "Best I've slept in a long time." "No bad dreams?" She shook her head, but something in her expression suggested that wasn't entirely true. "When do we go back to the well?" There it was, the question he'd been dreading. Caleb set down his fork, buying himself a moment by taking a long drink of coffee that had gone lukewarm. "Soon as we finish up here. But Lily May, I need to ask you something first." She looked at him, waiting, her small hand stilling on her fork. "Your parents, when they left you at the well, did they say anything else? Anything about where they were headed or how long they thought it would take?" "Papa said Socorro. Said there was a wheelwright there who could fix our wagon. Mama," her voice caught slightly. "Mama cried. She held me real tight and said to be brave, said they'd come back as fast as they could. And the wagon, where was it when they left?" "Just up the trail a ways, maybe a mile. The wheel broke clean through, and Papa said we couldn't go any further without fixing it." Caleb absorbed this, his jaw tightening. A mile up the trail. If there'd been a wagon, if there'd been a real breakdown, there would be evidence, tracks, debris, something. But he'd ridden that trail 100 times, had passed the well just 3 weeks ago, and there'd been no wagon then, no family in distress. "Lily May," he said carefully, "I want to ride out and check that wagon. See if maybe your folks left any message there, any sign of what happened. Would that be all right with you?" Hope flared in her eyes, bright and terrible. "You think they might have gone back to it?" "Could be. Worth looking." "Can I come with you?" He wanted to say no, wanted to spare her from witnessing whatever truth lay waiting, but he knew that protecting her from reality now would only make the eventual reckoning harder. "You can come, but you need to understand something first." She waited, her expression solemn. "Sometimes things don't turn out the way we hope," Caleb said, choosing his words with care. "Sometimes the answers we find aren't the ones we wanted. If we ride out there and the wagon's gone, or if there's no sign of your folks, that doesn't mean we stop looking for truth. It just means we have to face what is, not what we wish would be. You understand?" Lily May nodded slowly, but he could see her clinging to hope like a drowning person to driftwood. She wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. They finished breakfast in silence. Caleb cleaned the dishes while Lily May stood at the window, staring out at the desert that stretched endlessly in every direction. He found her a pair of his wife's old boots, too large but better than bare feet, and tied them tight with extra laces. The ride back toward the well took them through country painted in shades of tan and gray-green, sage and scrub oak clinging to existence in soil that gave up nothing easily. The morning sun climbed higher, burning off the night's chill, and Lily May sat in front of Caleb on the saddle with the rigid posture of someone carrying the weight of the world on narrow shoulders. "Tell me about your ranch," she said suddenly, her voice small against the vast silence. "Not much to tell. Got about 100 acres, most of it grazing land. Run cattle when the rain's good, which isn't often. Got chickens like you saw, and a vegetable garden that fights me every step of the way. You do it all yourself?" "I do." "That sounds lonely." The observation, simple and direct, hit harder than it should have. "I suppose it is sometimes, but I've gotten used to my own company." "I don't think I could get used to that," Lily May said. "Being alone all the time. I don't like how quiet it gets inside my head when there's nobody else around." Caleb felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of kinship he hadn't expected. "What does your head say when it gets too quiet?" She was silent for a long moment, her small hands gripping the saddle horn. "That maybe I did something wrong. That maybe if I'd been better, been quieter, been less trouble, things would have been different." "Lily May, look at me." She twisted in the saddle, her brown eyes meeting his. You listen close now, Caleb said, his voice firm. Whatever happened with your folks, whatever choices they made, that's not on you. Children don't make adults leave. Adults leave because they're facing things bigger than they know how to handle, and sometimes they make terrible choices because they don't see any good ones. But that's their failure, not yours. You hear me? Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back stubbornly. How do you know? You weren't there. Because I know what it looks like when someone's been carrying blame that doesn't belong to them. I've seen it in the mirror enough times to recognize it in someone else. She turned back around, processing this, and they rode on without speaking. The well came into view first, its stone structure dark against the pale earth, and then the trail beyond it, stretching east toward Socorro and whatever truth waited there. They reached the well, and Caleb dismounted, lifting Lily Mae down beside him. She walked immediately to the spot where she'd been sitting yesterday, where her cloth bundles still lay crumpled near the base. Nothing had changed. The dust told no new stories. You said the wagon was about a mile up? Caleb asked. Yes, that way. She pointed east, and something in her voice had already begun to waver. They followed the trail on foot, Caleb leading his horse, Lily Mae walking beside him with determined steps. A mile wasn't far, but in the desert every distance felt magnified by the emptiness that surrounded it. The trail showed tracks from previous travelers, horses, wagons, the occasional stagecoach, but nothing recent, nothing that suggested a family in distress. They walked in silence, the only sound their footfalls and the creak of leather from Caleb's saddle. When they'd covered what he judged to be close to a mile, Lily Mae stopped. It was here, she said, her voice barely audible. Right here. I remember that rock. She pointed to a large boulder 20 yards off the trail. And that bent tree. Papa pulled the wagon off to the side so other folks could pass. Caleb surveyed the area with a practiced eye. No wagon tracks led off the trail, no debris marked a breakdown. The earth showed no sign of recent disturbance beyond what wind and time had written there over weeks and months. He walked a wider circle, searching for anything, a piece of metal, a scrap of cloth, broken wheel spokes, but found nothing. Lily Mae stood frozen in place, her gaze sweeping the empty landscape with growing desperation. It was here, she repeated, louder now, as if volume could make it true. I didn't make it up. I didn't. I believe you, Caleb said quietly. Then where is it? Where did it go? He moved to stand beside her, his shadow falling across her small frame. Lily Mae, I need you to think back real careful. When your folks left you at the well, did the wagon look broken? Did you see the wheel yourself? Her face crumpled with the effort of remembering. I think so. Papa showed me. He said it was cracked through. She paused, uncertainty creeping in. But maybe I didn't look close enough. Maybe I just believed him because he said it. And your folks, did they have other children? Brothers or sisters traveling with you? No, just me. Where were you coming from? Where were you headed? We left Kansas in the spring. Papa said there was land in California, free land for anyone willing to work it. We were supposed to meet up with Mama's brother in Socorro, but she stopped, confusion crossing her features. But Uncle James was supposed to meet us 2 weeks ago. Papa said we'd missed him somehow, said we must have taken a wrong turn. The pieces fell into place with terrible clarity. A family leaving Kansas, taking a child across territory they didn't know, running out of money or supplies or hope somewhere along the way. The story repeated itself every year. Settlers who'd bet everything on dreams that dissolved in the harsh light of Western reality. And when the dream died, choices had to be made. Caleb knelt in the dust beside Lily Mae, bringing himself to her eye level. You ever hear your folks fighting about money or about the journey? She nodded slowly, reluctantly. They tried to be quiet, but I heard them sometimes at night. Papa said we should turn back, that we'd made a mistake. Mama said we couldn't go back, that there was nothing in Kansas but debt and shame. They argued about... Her voice dropped to a whisper. They argued about me, about how much easier things would be if it was just the two of them. When was this? A few nights before they left me at the well? Caleb felt rage building in his chest, hot and righteous, but he kept it off his face. Lily May, look at me. She met his eyes, hers brimming with tears she refused to let fall. But your folks did, leaving you. That wasn't because you're not worthy of love. That wasn't because you did anything wrong. They were drowning, and instead of holding on to you, they let go. And that's a choice they made, a choice they'll have to live with. But it's not a reflection of your worth. You understand the difference? They're not coming back, she said, the words emerging like shards of glass. Are they? They're never coming back? The truth sat between them, heavy and undeniable. Caleb wanted to soften it, to offer false comfort, but lies would only delay the inevitable pain. No, honey, I don't think they are. The sound that came from Lily May wasn't quite a sob, wasn't quite a scream. It was something deeper, something that came from a place where hope went to die. She sank to her knees in the dust, her small body shaking with the force of grief too large for her frame to contain. Caleb didn't try to stop her crying, didn't offer empty platitudes about everything being all right. He simply sat beside her in the dirt, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder, a silent presence that said she didn't have to face this alone. She cried until she had nothing left, until the tears stopped coming, and only dry, hitching breaths remained. The sun climbed higher, indifferent to the small tragedy playing out beneath it. Finally, Lily May spoke, her voice raw and scraped clean. What happens to me now? It was the question Caleb had been avoiding, the one that had kept him awake in his chair the night before. The territory had systems for this. Orphanages, church homes, families looking to take in workers disguised as charity. None of those options sat right with him. None of them offered the kind of life this fierce, loyal child deserved. I have a question for you first, Caleb said. Do you want to go to Socorro? There's a marshal there, and he could help find you a place. An orphanage in Santa Fe, maybe, or a family looking to adopt. Fear flashed across her face. Would they be good people? Some would be, some wouldn't. It's a gamble. What's the other choice? Caleb took a breath, aware he was standing at a crossroads of his own. You could stay at the ranch. With me. Not forever. Not unless you wanted to, but for now. Until we figure out something better. You'd let me stay? I'd be honored to have you. But you don't even know me. I could be bad. I could cause trouble. A ghost of a smile touched Caleb's weathered face. You waited by a well for 4 days because your papa told you to. You rationed an apple core like it was gold. You offered to prove your usefulness before you'd accept a meal. Lily May, you're not the problem. You never were. She studied him with those old, solemn eyes, searching for deception, for the catch that would reveal this as another promise destined to break. Why would you do that? Take in someone else's kid? Because someone should have done it already. Because you deserve better than what you got. And because... He paused, surprised by his own honesty. Because that ranch house has been empty too long. And maybe we both need something other than lonely. I don't want to be charity. You wouldn't be. Ranch needs work, and I could use a hand with the chickens and the garden. You'd earn your keep. And if I'm not good at it, if I mess up, then we'll figure it out together. Lily May, I'm not offering perfection. I'm offering a chance, a place to land while you catch your breath and work out who you want to be. No promises beyond that, except that you'll be fed and safe and treated with respect. That's all I know how to give. The silence stretched between them, filled with possibility and fear in equal measure. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals invisible to earthbound eyes. Can I think about it? Lily May asked quietly. Of course you can. Take all the time you need. She stood brushing dust from her dress in that careful, dignified way she had. She walked back toward the boulder she'd mentioned, running her hand along its sun-warmed surface. Caleb watched her, this small figure standing in the vastness of empty country, weighing choices no child should have to make. When she returned, her expression had settled into something calmer, more resolved. If I stay, I got some conditions. All right, let's hear them. I don't want you to feel obligated. If it gets too hard or if you change your mind, you have to tell me straight. No lying to protect my feelings. That's fair. What else? I want to learn things. Real things. Not just chores. I want to read better and write and know about how the world works beyond just surviving. I can teach you what I know, and we can get books from Socorro. And I don't want to be called charity or poor orphan or any of those words that make people look at you like you're broken. You got my word on that. Lily May took a deep breath. Then yes, I'll stay, if you're sure you want me. I'm sure. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that went deeper than words. This wasn't adoption, wasn't salvation, wasn't any of the neat categories people use to describe such arrangements. This was two people, both carrying losses too heavy to bear alone, choosing to shoulder the weight together. We should probably go tell someone official, Caleb said. Make it proper so nobody comes around asking questions or making trouble. The marshal in Socorro? That's right. We'll write in tomorrow, file the papers, make it legal. You'll be my ward, formal-like, until you're old enough to decide different. Your ward, Lily May repeated, testing the word. That means I belong somewhere. To someone. It means you belong to yourself first, but you've got a place that's yours for as long as you need it. They stood together in the empty landscape where a wagon had never broken down, where a family had made the choice to abandon hope disguised as temporary separation. The desert wind moved through sage and mesquite, carrying the smell of dust and distance. Can we go back to the well one more time? Lily May asked. I want to. I need to say goodbye. They walked back to the stone structure in silence, Caleb leading his horse, Lily May walking with purpose now instead of searching. When they reached the well, she approached the spot where she'd waited, where her cloth bundle still lay. She picked up the bundle, shaking out the worn fabric that had been her mother's shawl. She held it to her face for a moment, breathing in whatever scent remained, then folded it carefully and tucked it into her dress pocket. I loved them, she said to the emptiness. I loved them, and I waited, and I kept my promise. That's enough now. That's all I got to give. She looked up at Caleb, her eyes dry but red-rimmed. I'm ready to go home. The word hit him square in the chest. Home. Such a simple thing, such an impossible thing. He'd built a structure of adobe and timber, had carved out survival from unforgiving land, but he'd stopped thinking of it as home when his wife had died. It had become just a place, just walls and roof and the machinery of existence. But looking at Lily May now, seeing the way she'd claimed the word, Caleb felt something shift. Maybe home wasn't a place you built. Maybe it was a place you became when someone needed you to be their shelter. All right then, he said, his voice rough. Let's go home. The ride back to the ranch took them through country transformed by morning light. The harsh edges of dawn softened into something almost gentle. Lily May sat differently in the saddle now, less rigid, more settled. She asked questions about the land, about the cattle she could see grazing in the distance, about how long winter lasted and whether the chickens had names. Caleb answered each question with patience he didn't know he possessed, finding unexpected pleasure in sharing knowledge he'd taken for granted. When they crested the rise that overlooked his property, he saw it through her eyes, the sturdy house with its faded blue shutters, the barn weathered but sound, the corrals spreading out like promises written in split-rail fence. It's bigger than I remembered, Lily May said. Looks different in full daylight. No, I mean, she struggled to articulate something. I mean, it feels bigger, like there's room for things. Caleb understood what she meant. Space wasn't just physical. It was possibility, potential, the distance between what was and what could be. They dismounted in the yard, and Lily May stood looking at the house like she was seeing it for the first time, or maybe seeing it for what it could be rather than what it was. You want to meet the chickens proper? Caleb asked. Give them names if you want. Her face lit up with something that wasn't quite a smile, but was close enough to matter. I can name them. They're yours to name. They spent the afternoon in simple labor, collecting eggs, checking the garden for weeds, carrying water from the well Caleb had dug behind the house. Lily May worked with focused attention, learning quickly, asking questions when she didn't understand, accepting correction without defensiveness. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, Caleb showed her how to feed the chickens, how to scatter grain in wide arcs so the birds didn't fight over concentrated piles. They got personalities, Lily May observed, watching the way one hen dominated the feeding area while another waited patiently at the edges. That one's bossy, and that one's scared. They're not so different from people that way. Which one am I? The question caught him off guard. Caleb studied her, this child who'd waited by a well for days, who'd rationed food to nothing, who'd faced abandonment with courage that would break most adults. You're the one who waits her turn but doesn't back down when it matters. The one who's learned to survive but hasn't forgotten how to hope. Lily May absorbed this, her expression serious. What kind are you? The one who forgot there was anything worth hoping for until someone reminded him. She looked up at him then, and in her eyes he saw understanding beyond her years, recognition of what this exchange meant. Not father and daughter, not yet, maybe never in those exact terms, but something just as real. Two people choosing each other when the world had given them every reason not to trust anyone. That evening, they ate together at the table that had hosted only one for 7 years. Caleb cooked beans and cornbread again, simple food made significant by shared consumption. Lily May talked more than she had before. Small observations about the chickens, questions about the mountains visible in the distance, careful tests of whether conversation was welcome or merely tolerated. Tomorrow we'll ride to Socorro, Caleb said as they finished eating. Get the papers filed so everything's proper. You'll need some clothes, too. Can't keep wearing the same dress every day. I don't want to be expensive. Lily May, I've been spending money on nothing but myself and supplies for 7 years. I think I can afford to buy a child some dresses without going bankrupt. I could make do with one, maybe 2. We'll get what you need, not what you can survive on. There's a difference. She nodded, but he could see her calculating, her mind still operating from a place of scarcity where every resource had to be stretched to breaking. After dinner, as the light faded and the desert cooled, they sat on the porch, a luxury Caleb hadn't indulged in for years. The sky filled with stars, thousands of them, bright and cold and indifferent to the small dramas playing out beneath them. My mama used to say the stars were holes in the sky where heaven showed through, Lily May said quietly. Said that's where people went when they died, and they could look down and see us and know we were all right. That's a nice thought. Do you believe it? Caleb considered his answer carefully. I believe we tell ourselves stories to make sense of things that don't make sense, and I believe those stories matter, even if we can't prove they're true. What stories do you tell yourself? I used to tell myself that being alone was easier, that needing nobody meant nobody could hurt you. He paused, surprised by his own honesty. I'm starting to think that was a story I told because I was scared, not because it was true. Lily May was quiet for a moment, her gaze fixed on the stars. I told myself my parents were coming back. I believed it so hard, and I was wrong. You weren't wrong to believe. You were brave to hope. Those aren't the same thing as being foolish. It feels foolish now. Only because it didn't turn out the way you wanted. But Lily May, if you stopped hoping just because you might be disappointed, you'd never hope for anything. And a life without hope isn't living, it's just waiting to die. She turned to look at him, her young face serious in the starlight. Are you hoping now? For something? The question deserved honesty. I'm hoping, Caleb said slowly, that I'm good enough at this. That I don't let you down the way other people have. That when you look back on this choice years from now, you don't regret taking a chance on a lonely rancher who didn't know the first thing about raising a kid. You're doing fine so far. It's only been 2 days. That's 2 days more than nobody gave me before. The simple math of it, that basic decency could feel like abundance to someone who'd known so little of it, made Caleb's throat tight. They sat in comfortable silence after that, watching the sky deepen from blue to black, watching the stars multiply until the darkness was more light than shadow. Somewhere in the distance a coyote called, and another answered, their voices carrying across miles of empty land. Finally, Lily May yawned, the kind that came from exhaustion that was finally safe to acknowledge. I should probably sleep. That'd be wise. Tomorrow's a long ride to Socorro. She stood, hesitating at the door. Caleb? Yeah? Thank you for being honest with me at the well, for not lying even though the truth was hard. You deserve the truth. Everyone does, but especially kids. Most people don't think that way. Most people are wrong about a lot of things. She smiled, a real smile this time, small but genuine, and disappeared into the house. Caleb remained on the porch long after she'd gone to bed, thinking about choices and consequences, about the randomness that had brought him to a well at exactly the right moment, about the fragility of the line between salvation and tragedy. Tomorrow, they'd make it official. Tomorrow she'd have papers that said she belonged somewhere, to someone. Tomorrow would be the first day of something new, something neither of them had planned for or prepared for, something that required them both to be braver than they knew how to be. But tonight, for the first time in 7 years, Caleb Holt's ranch house held more than one heartbeat. Tonight the walls echoed with the presence of someone other than himself. Tonight the future looked different than the past, and that difference felt like possibility rather than loss. He stood finally, his joints protesting, and walked inside. The spare room door was cracked open, and he could hear the soft, steady breathing of a child finally safe enough to sleep deeply. He paused there, listening, and felt the weight of responsibility settle over him like a mantle. This was what he'd signed up for. This small person with her old eyes and her fierce loyalty and her catalog of wounds. This was the promise he'd made and the promise he intended to keep. The desert night pressed close around the house, dark and vast and unforgiving. But inside these adobe walls, in this space carved from hard land and harder years, something fragile was taking root. Not rescue, not salvation, just two people choosing, despite everything, to hope. The ride to Socorro began before sunrise, when the world was still caught between darkness and dawn. Lily Mae had woken without prompting, dressed in the same worn blue dress, her hair braided with careful fingers that had learned to manage without a mother's help. She ate breakfast quickly, efficiently, like someone who understood that daylight was currency not to be wasted. Caleb saddled his horse in the pre-dawn chill, his breath visible in the air, and lifted Lily Mae up before mounting behind her. The journey would take most of the day, 30 miles through country that shifted from scrubland to rocky hills and back again, following trails that had been carved first by animals, then by indigenous peoples, and finally by settlers who believed empty land was theirs for the taking. They rode in silence for the first hour, the rhythm of the horse's gait a kind of meditation. The sun crept over the eastern mountains, painting the landscape in shades of amber and rust, and Lily Mae watched it all with the attention of someone learning to read a new language. "What do I call you?" she asked suddenly, her voice small against the vast quiet. "When we get to town, when people ask, what do I say you are to me?" Caleb had been wondering the same thing. Guardian seemed too formal, too distant. Father felt presumptuous, a title that should be earned rather than claimed. "What feels right to you?" "I don't know. You're not my papa, but you're not just some man either. We could say I'm your guardian. That's what the papers will say." "That sounds like a word from a courthouse, not like something real." "What would you want to call me if you had your choice?" Lily Mae was quiet, thinking. "Could I just call you Caleb? And if people ask, we say you're taking care of me until I'm grown. That's true enough without needing fancy words." "That works for me." "And what do you call me when people ask?" "I call you Lily Mae. And if they need more than that, I tell them you're under my protection and they can mind their own business about the rest." She laughed, a sound so unexpected and bright that Caleb felt something loosen in his chest. "You'd really say that to people?" "I've said worse for less reason." They passed a freight wagon heading north, the driver tipping his hat in greeting. Caleb returned the gesture, and Lily Mae watched the exchange with interest, seeing how people interacted in this territory where everyone was a stranger until proven otherwise. "Were you born out here?" she asked. "In New Mexico?" "No. Came from Missouri originally. My father was a farmer, wanted me to take over his land, but I had other ideas. Headed west when I was 18, worked on cattle drives for a few years, saved enough to buy my own place." "Do you ever go back? To Missouri?" "No, my parents passed about 10 years ago. Got a brother somewhere in Texas, but we lost touch. That's how it goes sometimes. People drift apart when distance gets in the way." "Don't you miss having family?" The question struck deeper than she probably intended. "I had family. My wife was all the family I needed. After she died, I suppose I got used to not having it. stopped seeming like something I lacked, and started feeling like just how things were. Until now. Until now, he agreed. The trail descended into a shallow valley where a creek ran year-round, fed by snowmelt from the mountains. They stopped to water the horse and refill their canteens, and Lily May knelt by the water's edge, watching minnows dart between rocks. "Everything out here is so big," she said. "The sky, the land, the distances between things. Doesn't it make you feel small?" "Sometimes, but small isn't the same as insignificant. A seed's small, but it can grow into something that lasts 100 years. Is that what you think I am? A seed? I think you're someone who's still becoming. And that's true for most of us, even the old ones who pretend we're finished growing." She stood, wiping her wet hands on her dress. "Can I ask you something that might sound strange?" "Go ahead." "Do you think my parents loved me, even though they left?" Caleb took his time answering, knowing that whatever he said would matter. "I think love and capacity are two different things. Your parents might have loved you as much as they were able, but they didn't have the capacity to care for you the way you deserved. Their failure wasn't about your worth, it was about their limits. That doesn't make it hurt less." "No, it doesn't. But it does mean the hurt belongs to the situation, not to something broken inside you. You weren't too much, they were too little." Lily May absorbed this, her young face thoughtful. They remounted and continued south, the sun climbing higher, the heat building as morning stretched toward noon. Socorro appeared gradually, first as a smudge of buildings on the horizon, then as distinct structures arranged along a main street that paralleled the railroad tracks. It was a rough town, built to serve the railroad and the mining operations that had sprung up in the surrounding hills. False-fronted buildings housed saloons, general stores, a hotel, a livery stable, and the marshal's office that sat at the center of town like a reminder that order was something imposed rather than natural. Caleb rode straight to the marshal's office, dismounting and lifting Lily May down. She stood close to him, suddenly wary of the strangers moving along the wooden sidewalks, of the noise and activity that marked human settlement. "You all right?" Caleb asked quietly. "Just feels like a lot of people all at once." "Stay close to me. We'll get this done quick." The marshal's office was small and spare, furnished with a desk, 2 chairs, and a gun rack holding rifles that looked well-maintained. The marshal himself sat behind the desk, a man in his 50s with gray hair and the kind of weathered face that came from decades of negotiating human nature at its worst. "Help you?" he asked, looking up from papers he'd been reviewing. "Name's Caleb Holt. I've got a ranch north of here. This is Lily May Carter. I found her abandoned by the old Spanish well 4 days ago. Been waiting there alone for her parents who aren't coming back. I want to file papers making her my legal ward." The marshal's expression shifted from bureaucratic indifference to sharp attention. He studied Lily May, taking in her worn dress, her 2 large boots, the way she stood with careful dignity despite everything. "You report this to anyone?" the marshal asked. "I'm reporting it now. Didn't see much point in letting her spend another night alone in the desert while I rode to town for permission to do the decent thing." The marshal's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Fair enough. Sit down, both of you. This'll take some time." They settled into the chairs across from his desk. The marshal pulled out forms, dipping his pen in ink, and began asking questions in a methodical voice that suggested he'd done this before, though perhaps not often enough to make it routine. "Full name?" "Lily May Carter," she said, her voice steady. "Age?" She hesitated. 7, I think. Maybe 8. My birthday's in summer, but I don't remember if it's passed yet." The marshal wrote this down without comment. "Parents' names?" "James and Sarah Carter." She spelled the last name carefully. "They say where they were from, where they were headed?" "Kansas, originally, going to California. We were supposed to meet my Uncle James in Socorro, but we never found him." The marshal exchanged a look with Caleb, one that said they both understood what had really happened. "I'll check the records, see if anyone by that name passed through. But I'll be straight with you, young lady. Most folks who abandon children don't leave forwarding addresses." "I know," Lily May said quietly. "They're not coming back." The marshal's expression softened slightly. He turned his attention to Caleb. You understand what you're taking on? This isn't like keeping a stray dog. This is a human child who'll need food, clothes, education, medical care if she gets sick. She'll need raising, and that's a full-time proposition. I understand. You married? Widower, 7 years. Any experience with children? None. But I've broken horses and managed cattle and kept myself alive in country that doesn't suffer fools. I figure I can learn what I don't know. The marshal studied him, weighing something. Why? You don't know this girl from Adam. Why tie yourself down with someone else's responsibility? Because she was sitting by a well for 4 days and nobody came. Because she deserves better than what she got. Because I've got room and means and no good reason to say no except selfishness. Caleb's voice hardened. And because if we're the kind of territory that rides past abandoned children without stopping, then we're not worth the land we're standing on. The silence that followed was heavy but not hostile. Finally, the marshal nodded. All right then, I'll file the papers. You'll be her legal guardian until she reaches majority or until you petition for formal adoption. You understand she can be removed from your care if there's evidence of abuse or neglect? I understand. And you, Miss Carter? The marshal addressed Lily May directly. You understand this man's offering you a home, but if he treats you poorly, if he hurts you or fails to provide for you, you come straight to me. Nobody's got the right to mistreat a child, not even a legal guardian. You hear? Yes, sir. You want this arrangement? You're willing to go with Mr. Holt? Lily May looked at Caleb, her expression serious, and then back at the marshal. I want it. All right then. The marshal signed the papers with a flourish, pressed his official seal into warm wax, and slid the documents across the desk. You're now officially Lily May Carter, ward of Caleb Holt. These papers prove it if anyone asks questions. Caleb folded the papers carefully, tucking them into his jacket pocket. Thank you, Marshal. Don't thank me yet. Come back in a year and tell me how it's going. If that girl's still healthy and happy, then we'll call this a success. They left the office, stepping out into the harsh midday sun. Lily May was quiet, processing what had just happened, the way her life had been officially altered by words on paper and wax seals. How do you feel? Caleb asked. Strange. Like something important happened, but I can't tell yet if it's good strange or bad strange. That's fair. We'll figure it out as we go. What now? Now we get you some proper clothes. Can't have you wearing that same dress until it falls apart. They walked down the main street to the general store, a large establishment that sold everything from mining equipment to ladies' hats. The proprietor, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and efficient movements, looked up as they entered. Help you folks? She asked. Need to outfit this young lady with some clothes, dresses, undergarments, shoes, whatever she needs. The woman's gaze moved from Caleb to Lily May, and something in her expression shifted. Not quite pity, but recognition of a familiar story. Come with me, sweetheart. Let's see what we can find in your size. Lily May looked to Caleb for permission, and he nodded. Go on, pick what you like. I'll be right here. She followed the proprietor to the back of the store, where ready-made dresses hung on hooks and bolts of fabric waited for those willing to sew. Caleb wandered the aisles, picking up supplies he'd need: coffee, flour, sugar, lamp oil. He could hear the murmur of female voices from the back, the proprietor asking questions in a gentle tone, Lily May answering with her characteristic carefulness. 20 minutes later, they emerged. Lily May carried 2 dresses, one practical calico for everyday wear, one nicer cotton for town visits. The proprietor had added undergarments, stockings, and a pair of sturdy boots that actually fit. She'll need a coat for winter too, the proprietor said, pulling down a wool coat from a high shelf. And a hat for summer sun. Girl her age shouldn't be going bareheaded in this heat. Caleb nodded, adding these to the growing pile. Lily May watched with increasing anxiety as the items accumulated, her eyes darting to the prices marked on small tags. This is too much, she whispered to Caleb. I don't need all of this. Yes, you do, and I can afford it, so stop worrying. But, Lily May, if you had $100 in your pocket and you saw someone who needed a coat, would you buy them one? Of course. Then let me do the same without feeling guilty about it. She subsided, but he could see her calculating, her mind already working out how she could earn back what was being spent on her. The proprietor rang up the purchases, wrapping everything in brown paper tied with string. The total came to more than Caleb usually spent in 3 months, but he paid without hesitation, counting out bills from his wallet. "You're a good man, Mr. Holt," the proprietor said quietly as she handed him his change. "Not many would take in an orphan girl. She's lucky to have found you." "I'm the lucky one," Caleb said, and was surprised to realize he meant it. They loaded the packages onto his horse, and Caleb suggested they get lunch before starting the long ride home. The hotel restaurant served simple fare, stew, bread, coffee, but it was hot and substantial, and Lily May ate with the focus of someone still not entirely convinced food would remain abundant. "You can slow down," Caleb said gently. "Nobody's going to take your plate." She set down her spoon, embarrassed. "It's habit. Hard to break." "I know, but we've got time. You've got time." They were finishing their meal when a woman approached their table, her dress fine enough to suggest money, her expression carrying the particular kind of concern that often preceded unwanted advice. "Excuse me," she said, addressing Caleb. "I couldn't help but notice you and this young girl. Are you her father?" "I'm her guardian." "I see." The woman's tone suggested she saw more than that, none of it good. "It's just that it's unusual for a single man to be caring for a girl child. People might talk, might draw conclusions." Caleb set down his coffee cup with deliberate care, his expression cooling. "Let them talk. My relationship with Lily May is legal, proper, and none of their concern. I'm only saying, for appearance's sake, it might be better if she were placed with a married couple, a proper family." "I am a proper family," Caleb said, his voice hardening. "And unless you're the marshal or a judge, I don't recall asking for your opinion on how I conduct my affairs." The woman's face flushed. "I'm only thinking of the child's reputation." "Then think about how her reputation suffers when people like you suggest she's somehow improper for accepting care from someone willing to give it." He stood, his height suddenly imposing. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we've got a long ride ahead." He paid their bill and guided Lily May toward the door, his hand protective on her shoulder. Outside, she looked up at him with wide eyes. "Will people always think badly about this?" she asked. "About me staying with you?" "Some will. Small minds usually do. But their thinking doesn't make it true, and their opinions don't pay our bills or put food on our table. What matters is what we know, that this arrangement is right and honest and hurting nobody." "But she said people would talk." "People always talk. That's what people do when their own lives aren't interesting enough. You can't control what others say, Lily May. You can only control how you respond to it, and I respond by not giving it any power over me." They mounted up and began the journey home. The sun passed its peak now, shadows lengthening as afternoon wore on. Lily May was quieter than she'd been on the ride in, and Caleb could sense her processing the day, the official papers that made her someone's responsibility, the clothes that said someone considered her worth investing in, the woman whose concern masked judgment. "Caleb," she said, after miles of silence. "Yeah? Do you think there's something wrong with me, that I ended up here instead of with a regular family?" The question was asked with such careful neutrality, like she was trying not to reveal how much the answer mattered. Caleb pulled the horse to a stop, turning in the saddle so he could see her face. "Look at me, Lily May." She met his eyes, hers searching for truth. "There is nothing wrong with you, not one single thing. What happened to you? Your parents leaving, you ending up at my ranch instead of in some picture-perfect family. That's circumstance, not character. You're brave and loyal and smart and kind. The fact that your story doesn't look like everyone else's doesn't make it lesser. It just makes it yours. But that woman sees the world through a lens so narrow she can't imagine anything outside her own experience. She thinks family has only one shape, one structure, and anything different must be wrong. But she's mistaken. Family is what you build, not what you're born into. And sometimes the families we choose are stronger than the ones we're given." Lily May was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. "Are we a family then? You and me?" The question deserved honesty, not sentiment. "I don't know yet. We're working toward it, building the foundation. But family isn't declared. It's earned over time, through trust and care, and showing up even when it's hard. Ask me again in a year, and maybe we'll both know the answer." "That's fair," she said, and seemed satisfied with the complexity of his response rather than disappointed by the lack of easy certainty. They rode on as the sun descended, painting the desert in shades of gold and purple. The land looked different in evening light, softer somehow, more forgiving. They passed the Spanish well without stopping. That chapter had closed, and there was no need to revisit it. The ranch appeared as dusk settled, the house a dark shape against the darkening sky. Caleb tended the horse while Lily May carried her packages inside, and when he entered the house, he found her standing in the middle of the main room, looking around like she was seeing it for the first time. "What is it?" he asked. "I was trying to see it the way that woman in Socorro would see it, trying to figure out what's wrong with it, why it's not proper." She turned to face him. "But I can't see it. All I see is a place where nobody yells, where there's food every day, where I have my own bed and nobody tells me I'm too much trouble. If that's not proper, then I don't want proper." Something in Caleb's chest cracked open. Some wall he'd built so carefully that he'd forgotten it was there. "Me either." That evening they fell into routines that were beginning to feel natural, Caleb cooking while Lily May set the table, both of them cleaning up together afterward, the easy silence of shared space. After dinner, Caleb pulled out a book he'd owned for years, a volume of folk tales collected from various territories, and read aloud while Lily May listened, curled in a chair with the contentment of someone finally allowed to be a child. When the stories were done and the fire had burned low, Lily May stood, stretching. "I should sleep. Long day." "It was. You did good, though. Handled yourself well in town." "Even when that woman said those things?" "Especially then. You didn't let her words make you small." Lily May smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Good night, Caleb." "Good night, Lily May." She disappeared into her room, and Caleb sat alone in the fading firelight, thinking about the strange turns life took, about the way a single choice could alter everything. A week ago, he'd been a man alone with his routines and his resignation. His life measured in seasons of planting and harvest, in cattle sold and supplies purchased. Now he was responsible for another human being, for her safety and her growth and her sense of self in a world that would judge her for circumstances beyond her control. The weight should have felt heavier, should have felt like burden, like obligation, like the sacrifice of freedom. Instead, it felt like purpose, like his life had finally remembered how to mean something beyond simple survival. He stood, banking the fire, checking the doors, performing the small rituals of securing a home for the night. But now those rituals included pausing at a cracked door, listening for the sound of steady breathing, making sure a small person was safe and warm and settled. Outside, the desert night pressed close, infinite and indifferent. Inside, the house held 2 heartbeats instead of 1, 2 lives instead of none. The change wasn't dramatic, no transformation, no sudden revelation, just the quiet accumulation of small moments, small choices, small acts of showing up. Caleb settled into his own bed, exhausted but not empty, and let sleep take him with the knowledge that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions, new opportunities to figure out what he was doing. He didn't have all the answers, didn't know if he'd be good at this, if he'd make the right choices, if a year from now Lily May would look back on this decision with gratitude or regret. But he knew one thing with certainty. He'd try. He'd show up every day and try to be what she needed, to provide not just food and shelter, but dignity and respect and the space to become whoever she was meant to be. That was all anyone could do. All anyone should be asked to do. And for now, in this small house on the edge of territory that demanded everything and gave back only what you could wrestle from it, that was enough. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human drama, and the desert breathed its slow, eternal breath. Inside the adobe walls, 2 people slept, one who'd learned to hope again, one who'd remembered why hoping mattered, and in the morning, they'd wake and begin again, building something neither of them had planned for, something fragile and fierce and entirely their own. The seasons turned the way they always did in New Mexico, slowly, then all at once. Summer heat gave way to autumn's brief mercy. Then winter arrived with cold that cut through adobe walls and made the morning chores feel like penance. Through it all, Lily May grew. Not just in height, though she did that too, her dresses requiring adjustment and then replacement. She grew in confidence, in competence, in the kind of quiet strength that came from knowing she belonged somewhere. The wariness that had marked her first weeks at the ranch gradually loosened its grip, though it never disappeared entirely. Some things, Caleb understood, left marks too deep to fully erase. By spring, nearly a year after he'd found her by the well, Lily Mae could manage the chickens without supervision, could help with calving season when the cattle grew temperamental, could read aloud from the books Caleb brought back from Socorro with increasing fluency. She'd learned to ride the old mare Caleb had purchased for her, learned to mend fences and judge weather, and 100 other small skills that made up ranch life. But more than that, she'd learned to laugh, to ask questions without fear of being told she was bothersome, to take up space without apologizing for her existence. One morning in late April, with wildflowers painting the desert in unexpected colors, Lily Mae came in from feeding the chickens with her jaw set in the determined way that meant she'd been thinking about something serious. "Caleb," she said, setting the egg basket on the table with careful precision, "I need to talk to you about something." He looked up from the harness he was mending, reading her expression. "All right, sit down. This sounds important." She settled into the chair across from him, her hands folded in her lap in that old, careful way. At 8 years old, they'd settled on 8, celebrating her birthday in August with a cake that had turned out lopsided but tasted fine. She still carried traces of the girl who'd waited by the well. But now those traces existed alongside newer elements: determination, curiosity, the beginnings of a self that wasn't defined solely by survival. "I've been thinking about my parents," she said, "about whether I should try to find them." The statement hit Caleb harder than expected. He set down the harness, giving her his full attention. "What brought this on?" "I had a dream last night about my mama. She was calling for me, saying she was sorry, saying she wanted me back." Lily Mae's voice remained steady, but her hands twisted together. "And when I woke up, I couldn't remember what her face looked like anymore. I can remember her voice, sort of, but her face is gone. And I realized I don't know if that's because I'm forgetting or because I want to forget. Both can be true at the same time. But shouldn't I want to find them? Shouldn't I want to know why they left? Whether they ever looked for me? Whether they—" She stopped, the question too painful to complete. "Whether they regret it." Caleb finished gently. She nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Caleb chose his words carefully, aware that what he said now would matter in ways that rippled forward. "You're allowed to want answers, Lily Mae. You're allowed to wonder about them, to miss them even after what they did. That doesn't make you disloyal to the life you've built here, and you're also allowed to decide that some questions aren't worth the cost of asking them." "What do you mean?" "I mean that finding your parents might give you answers, but it might also open wounds that have started to heal. They might be dead. They might be alive and want nothing to do with you. They might be sorry, or they might not. And whatever you learn, you'll have to carry it. So the question isn't whether you should want to find them. The question is whether knowing would make your life better or just more complicated." Lily Mae absorbed this, her young face thoughtful. "Did you ever wonder about people who left you? Your brother in Texas?" "Sometimes, but I realized something over the years. The people who want to be in your life find a way to be there. The ones who don't make excuses or just disappear. My brother and I drifted apart because neither of us fought to stay close. That's different from what happened to you, but the principle's the same. Your parents know where Socorro is. They could have checked with the marshal, asked around, found out what happened to you. They chose not to. Maybe they're scared. Maybe they think I hate them. Maybe. Or maybe they made a choice they knew was unforgivable and decided living with guilt from a distance was easier than facing what they'd done." Caleb leaned forward, his expression serious. "Lily Mae, I can't tell you what to do. If you want to try to find them, we'll figure out how. I'll help you. But I need you to understand that you don't owe them forgiveness, and you don't owe them a relationship just because they gave you life. What they did was abandonment, plain and simple. Whether you let them back in is your choice, not your obligation." "I don't know what I want," she admitted, her voice small. "Then don't decide yet. Give it time. The question will still be there next month, next year. There's no deadline on figuring out your feelings." She nodded slowly, relief visible in the loosening of her shoulders. "Can I ask you something else?" "Always." That woman in Socorro last year, the one who said people would talk, was she right? Do people think badly about us? Caleb sighed. Some do. Saw it in town last month when I went for supplies. A couple of women stopped talking when I walked by. Gave me looks that said they'd been discussing something they didn't want me to hear. But Lily May, their judgment says more about them than about us. We're not doing anything wrong. But it bothers you, I can tell. He couldn't lie to her. It does. Not because I think they're right, but because I worry their talk might hurt you, might make your life harder than it needs to be. It doesn't hurt me. Or maybe it does, but not as much as being alone did. I'll take whispers behind my back over sitting by that well any day. The pragmatism in her voice, the clear-eyed assessment of costs and benefits, reminded Caleb that this child had learned hard lessons about survival long before he'd found her. She knew how to calculate what she could live with. You're tougher than I gave you credit for, he said. I learned from watching you. You don't let people's opinions change how you walk through the world. I try not to, but I'm 44 years old, and I've had decades to build up calluses. You're 8. You shouldn't have to develop thick skin this young. Maybe not, but I'd rather learn how to handle hard things than pretend they don't exist. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the morning light streaming through the windows, dust motes dancing in the air. Finally, Lily May stood, retrieving the egg basket. I'm going to gather the eggs I missed, she said. That old hen hides them sometimes. The speckled one? That's the one. She's clever. Thinks if she buries them deep enough in the straw, I won't find them. Takes after you that way. Stubborn. Lily May smiled, a quick flash of humor. I learned that from you too. She disappeared outside, and Caleb returned to his harness mending, but his hands moved automatically while his mind worked through the conversation they'd just had. The question of her parents would resurface. He knew that. Children needed to make sense of their origins, needed to understand the people who'd brought them into the world, even when those people failed them spectacularly. When the time came, he'd help her search if that's what she truly wanted. But privately, he hoped she'd choose to let it lie. Not for his sake, but for hers. Some doors, once opened, couldn't be closed again. Some truths did more harm than good. The days lengthened as spring progressed into early summer. Caleb taught Lily May to track animals by their prints, to read the sky for weather changes, to understand the language of the land that sustained them. She absorbed knowledge with the intensity of someone making up for lost time, asking questions that often surprised him with their insight. One afternoon, while they were checking fences in the far pasture, she stopped suddenly, her attention caught by something in the distance. What is it? Caleb asked, following her gaze. There's someone coming. On foot. Caleb squinted against the sun and saw what she'd spotted. A figure walking the road from Socorro, moving with the slow determination of someone covering distance through sheer will rather than energy. As they watched, the figure stumbled, caught themselves, kept moving. We should see if they need help, Lily May said. They rode toward the approaching figure, and as they drew closer, Caleb saw it was a woman, perhaps 30 years old, her dress torn and dusty, her face sunburned and drawn with exhaustion. She looked up as they approached, wariness and hope warring in her expression. Easy now, Caleb said gently, dismounting. You all right, ma'am? The woman swayed on her feet, and he reached out to steady her. Up close, he could see she was in rough shape, dehydrated, exhausted, probably hadn't eaten in days. Water, she managed, her voice cracked and dry. Caleb handed her his canteen, and she drank greedily, water spilling down her chin. He let her drink her fill before gently taking the canteen back. My ranch is about a mile north, he said. Can you make it that far if you ride with me? She nodded weakly, and with Lily May's help, they got her mounted. The ride back was slow, the woman barely conscious, leaning heavily against Caleb. At the ranch, they got her inside and settled into a chair. Lily May fetched fresh water and some bread while Caleb assessed their unexpected guest. She looked like she'd been through hell, clothing torn, hands scraped raw, the kind of damage that came from traveling through rough country without proper supplies or knowledge. I'm Caleb Holt, he said once she'd eaten some bread and drunk more water. This is Lily May. What's your name? Emma, the woman said, her voice stronger now. Emma Price. Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me. Where are you coming from? Where are you headed? Emma's face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. I don't know anymore. I left my husband in Socorro 3 days ago. He wasn't a good man, drank too much, got mean when he did. I finally had enough, took what little money we had and started walking west. Thought I could make it to another town, find work, but I got lost and ran out of water, and she stopped, overcome. You're safe here, Caleb said quietly. You can rest, get your strength back. Then we'll figure out what comes next. Lily May had been watching this exchange with intense attention, and now she spoke. Did your husband hurt you? The direct question made Emma blink in surprise, but she answered honestly. Yes. Not at first, but after we got married, things changed, got worse over time. My mama used to have bruises, Lily May said quietly. She said she was clumsy, but I knew better. The room went silent, this revelation hanging heavy in the air. Caleb had wondered about Lily May's family, about what had led to the abandonment, but she'd never volunteered details beyond the basics. Now, in the presence of another woman running from violence, the truth emerged. I'm sorry, Emma said to Lily May. No child should have to see that. No woman should have to live it, Lily May countered. Emma smiled despite her tears. You're wise for your age. I've had to be. Caleb showed Emma to the spare room. Lily May had moved into what had been his wife's sewing room months ago, claiming she needed less space, and left her to rest. When he returned to the main room, he found Lily May staring out the window, her expression distant. You never mentioned your father hurt your mother, he said gently. You never asked, and I didn't want you to think I came from bad people, that maybe I'd turn out bad too. Lily May, look at me. She turned, her eyes wary. Violence isn't hereditary. Your father's choices don't determine your character. You're your own person, separate from whatever darkness they carried. But what if it's in me? What if one day I get angry and You won't. You know how I know? She shook her head. Because you're aware of it. Because you're asking the question. People who turn violent usually don't spend time worrying about whether they might. They just do it and make excuses after. He moved to stand beside her at the window. You're good, Lily May. Deep down good. That's not something you inherit or lose. That's something you are. She leaned against him, a rare moment of physical affection, and he put his arm around her shoulders. They stood like that for a long moment, watching the sun paint the desert in evening colors. What will happen to Emma? Lily May asked. Don't know yet. Depends on what she wants, what she's running toward versus what she's running from. Can she stay here? For a while? If she needs to. But Lily May, this isn't a refuge for every person running from something. We can help when we can, but we can't fix everyone's problems. I know, but maybe we can fix hers, or at least give her time to fix it herself. Emma stayed for 3 days, regaining her strength, her color returning as regular meals and rest did their work. She helped with chores without being asked, proving herself capable and willing. On the third evening, over dinner, she finally spoke about her plans. I need to go to Santa Fe, she said. I have a sister there. She's offered to take me in before, but I was too proud, too ashamed to admit I'd made a mistake marrying James. Pride's a luxury when you're in danger, Caleb said. Your sister still there? As far as I know. Haven't written in 6 months, but she was there then. I'll take you to Socorro tomorrow. You can catch the stage to Santa Fe from there. I don't have money for the stage. Spent the last of what I had on supplies before I left, and James found them and threw them out when he was drunk. Caleb pulled out his wallet, counting bills. This should cover the stage and then some, enough to get you started once you reach your sister. Emma stared at the money, her eyes filling with tears. I can't take this. You've already done so much. You can and you will. Consider it a loan if it makes you feel better. Pay me back when you're on your feet, or pay it forward to the next person who needs help. Either way works for me. Why are you doing this? You don't know me. Caleb glanced at Lily May, who was watching this exchange with quiet attention. Because someone should have helped you before it got this bad. Because looking the other way doesn't sit right with me. And because if I can make one person's life a little less hard, that seems like decent use of money I was going to spend on supplies I don't really need. Emma reached across the table, gripping his hand. You're a good man, Caleb Holt. I'm just a man who tries. Most days, that's the best any of us can do. The next morning, Caleb saddled his horse while Lily Mae helped Emma gather the few belongings she had. Before they left, Emma knelt down to Lily Mae's eye level. "Thank you for sharing your home with me," she said, "and for sharing your story. It helped me feel less alone." "Will you be all right?" Lily Mae asked. "In Santa Fe?" "I will. Your Caleb helped me see that running toward something is better than running from something. I'm going to my sister because I want to be there, not just because I need to leave here." "That's different." "That is different," Lily Mae agreed. "Good luck, Emma." "Good luck to you too, little one. You've got a good life here. Hold on to it." The ride to Socorro was quiet, Emma lost in her own thoughts, and Caleb content to let her process in peace. At the stage office, he purchased her ticket and pressed the remaining bills into her hand. "You're sure?" she asked one last time. "I'm sure. Take care of yourself, Emma. And if your sister's husband turns out to be like yours, you get yourself out before it gets bad. You hear me?" "I hear you. And Caleb, that girl of yours, Lily Mae, she's special. Don't let the world tell you otherwise." "I won't." The stage pulled away, carrying Emma toward whatever future she'd build, and Caleb rode back to the ranch thinking about the strange ways people intersected, the random chances that determined who got helped and who didn't. If he hadn't been checking that fence, if Lily Mae hadn't spotted Emma, if they'd decided helping wasn't worth the trouble, Emma might have died in the desert, another nameless casualty of circumstance. But they had helped, and she would live, and maybe that was all any of them could do. Show up when the moment required it and hope it was enough. When he arrived back at the ranch, he found Lily Mae in the garden, pulling weeds with focused determination. She looked up as he approached, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. "She get off all right?" Lily Mae asked. "She did. Seemed in better spirits, more hopeful." "Good." Lily Mae returned to her weeding, then stopped, looking up at him again. "Caleb, I've been thinking about what you said. About my parents, about not needing to find them." "And?" "And I think you're right. They know where Socorro is. If they wanted to find me, they could have. And the fact that they haven't, that tells me everything I need to know." She pulled another weed, examining its roots before tossing it aside. "I'm done waiting for people who aren't coming. I'd rather spend my time with the person who's here." Something in Caleb's chest expanded, warm and unexpected. "That's a wise choice. It's a practical choice. And besides, I've got a question that matters more." "What's that?" "Do you think next year, when I'm 9, we could get another horse? The mare's wonderful, but she's old, and I'd like to learn to ride something with more spirit." The ordinariness of the question, the assumption of a future together, the casual way she'd folded herself into his life and expected to stay there, it hit him harder than any dramatic declaration could have. "I think we could manage that," he said, his voice rougher than intended. "Start looking this summer. Find one that suits you. A young one. One I can train myself." "That's harder than it sounds." "I know, but I want to learn hard things. You've taught me that hard things are usually the ones worth doing." She returned to her weeding, satisfied with his answer, and Caleb stood watching her for a moment. This child who'd been left by a well, who'd rationed an apple core across 4 days, who'd chosen to stop waiting for people who weren't coming and instead build something with the person who was. The year had turned full circle. Summer had become autumn, had become winter, had become spring, had become summer again. And through it all, they'd built something neither of them had planned for. Not perfection. There were still hard days, still moments when old wounds ached, still times when Lily Mae woke from nightmares and Caleb didn't know the right words to comfort her. But there was also laughter. There were small triumphs. There were mornings when breakfast felt like communion and evenings when silence between them was comfortable rather than empty. That night, after Lily Mae had gone to bed, Caleb sat on the porch watching stars wheel overhead in their ancient patterns. He thought about the question the marshal had asked a year ago. Why tie yourself down with someone else's responsibility? At the time, he'd given an answer about decency and duty and having room and means. But the truth, he realized now, was simpler and more complicated. He'd taken Lily Mae in because turning away felt like dying, like choosing loneliness over the terrifying possibility of connection. Because 7 years of walls hadn't protected him from pain. They'd just isolated him from everything else, too. And Lily May had needed him, yes, but he'd needed her just as much. Needed someone to cook for besides himself. Needed someone to teach, to protect, to show up for every day. Needed a reason to believe that his life still had purpose beyond just continuing. They'd saved each other, though neither of them had used that word. They'd chosen each other when the world had given them every excuse to choose loneliness instead. A year ago, by a well, he'd found a girl who needed a home. But what he hadn't realized until now was that he'd been waiting by his own well, hoping someone would need him enough to bring him back to life. The desert wind moved through sage and mesquite, carrying the smell of dust and possibility. Inside the house, 2 heartbeats marked time, 2 lives intertwined by chance and choice. Morning would come, bringing new challenges, new questions, new opportunities to figure out what they were building together. But tonight, under stars that had witnessed 10,000 years of human drama and remained unchanged, Caleb Holt felt something he hadn't felt in 7 years. He felt like he'd come home. The years moved like water through desert sand, sometimes rushing, sometimes barely perceptible, but always forward. Lily May grew from a child into a young woman, her frame filling out with the kind of strength that came from physical labor and good food, her mind sharpening through the books Caleb brought home and the questions she never stopped asking. By the time she turned 16, she could manage the ranch as well as Caleb could, maybe better in some ways. She'd developed an intuition for the cattle, could read weather patterns with accuracy that occasionally unnerved him, and had a way with horses that bordered on uncanny. The young mare they'd purchased when she was 9 had become her constant companion, trained with patience Caleb hadn't known anyone possessed. But more than her competence, what struck him was her character. She'd grown into someone who faced the world with clear eyes and a generous heart, someone who helped neighbors without expectation of return, who stood up to injustice when she saw it, who'd learned to carry her past without letting it define her future. The town of Socorro had eventually accepted their unusual arrangement, though it had taken years. Some people still whispered, still looked at them with questions they were too polite to ask aloud. But most had come to see what Caleb had known from the beginning, that family wasn't about blood or convention, but about showing up day after day and choosing to care. One afternoon in late October, with autumn painting the desert in golds and russets, Lily May came in from the barn with the kind of determined expression that meant she'd been working up to something. "We need to talk," she said, settling at the table where they'd had countless conversations over the years. Caleb set down the ledger he'd been reviewing, giving her his attention. At 63, he moved slower than he once had, his joints protesting the cold mornings, his hair gone completely gray. But his mind remained sharp, and he could still read Lily May's moods like familiar territory. "What's on your mind?" he asked. "I've been offered a job, teaching position at the school in Socorro. They need someone who can handle the younger children, teach them reading and arithmetic. Mrs. Henderson recommended me." Pride swelled in Caleb's chest, but it came tangled with something more complicated. "That's quite an honor. When would you start?" "After the new year. But Caleb, the position requires me to live in town during the week. There's a boarding house for teachers, and I'd only be able to come home on weekends." There it was, the thing he'd known was coming, but had been avoiding thinking about. Lily May was 23 years old, capable and brilliant, and the world beyond the ranch had opportunities she deserved to explore. But the thought of the house empty 5 days a week, of mornings without her steady presence, of evenings without her voice, it felt like losing something he'd only just learned to have. "What do you want to do?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral. "I want to teach. I've always wanted to teach. You know that. But I also don't want to leave you managing everything alone. You're not as young as you used to be, and the ranch is a lot of work for one person. I managed it alone before you came. That was 16 years ago, and you're not that man anymore." The observation was accurate and uncomfortable. "So what are you proposing?" Lily May leaned forward, her expression earnest. "I'm proposing we hire help, someone who can take over the heavy work during the week while I'm teaching. And I'm proposing you consider selling off some of the cattle, reducing the herd to something more manageable. We don't need 100 head anymore. 30 or 40 would be plenty." "You've been thinking about this a lot." "I have. Because I want both things, Caleb. I want to teach, to use what you've taught me to help other children learn. But I also want to come home on weekends to a ranch that's still running, to a person who hasn't worked himself into the ground trying to prove he doesn't need help. The truth in her words struck deep. He had been pushing himself harder lately, trying to prove to himself, to her, to some invisible audience, that he was still capable, still useful, still the man who'd built this place from nothing. "You're worried I can't handle you leaving," he said. "I'm worried you'll try to handle it alone when you don't have to. There's no shame in accepting help, Caleb. You taught me that. Time to practice what you preach." He couldn't help but smile. "When did you get so wise?" "I learned from the best." She reached across the table, covering his weathered hand with her younger one. "I'm not abandoning you. I'm not leaving like they did. I'm growing up and building a life while still keeping you in it. There's a difference." The distinction mattered. She was right. This wasn't abandonment. This was a daughter becoming her own person while maintaining the bonds that had sustained them both. It was natural, healthy, exactly what should happen. But knowing that didn't make it feel any easier. "All right," Caleb said finally. "We'll hire help. Cut the herd down. You take the teaching position. But Lily May, you promised me something." "What?" "If it gets to be too much, if trying to balance both things wears you down, you come talk to me. We'll figure it out together. You don't have to choose between the ranch and your own life. We'll find a way to make room for both." Relief washed across her face. "Thank you. I was so worried you'd be angry or hurt, or I am hurt," he admitted. "But not because you're doing anything wrong. I'm hurt because change is hard, and I've gotten comfortable with how things are. But comfortable isn't always what's best. You deserve to do more than manage my ranch and cook my meals. You deserve to build something of your own. This ranch is mine too. You've always made it clear I have a place here, a stake in it." "I have, and I mean it. But it's also important you know you can leave and come back, that your place here isn't contingent on you staying put. Home should be something you choose, not something you're trapped by." Lily May's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "How did I get so lucky to find you?" "I could ask the same question. Seems to me we both found each other right when we needed to." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, hands still linked across the table, the afternoon light streaming through windows that had witnessed 16 years of their shared life. "There's something else," Lily May said, her voice softer now. "Someone I want you to meet. His name is Daniel Crawford. He's a carpenter in Socorro, been doing some work at the school. We've been talking, and, well, he'd like to come to dinner, meet you properly." The announcement shouldn't have surprised Caleb, but it did. Not because Lily May was too young, she was 23, plenty old enough for courtship, but because he'd been so focused on their daily routine that he'd missed the signs of her building a life beyond it. "How long have you been talking with this Daniel?" he asked. "About 6 months. Nothing serious at first, just conversation. But it's gotten more serious recently, and I wanted to tell you, wanted you to meet him before things went any further. Before you make decisions about your future." "Yes." Caleb studied her face, seeing the nervousness there, the fear that he might disapprove or feel betrayed. But beneath that, he saw something else. Happiness. Real, genuine happiness that had nothing to do with duty or gratitude, but with her own desires and choices. "Bring him to dinner," Caleb said. "This Sunday. I'll try not to scare him off." "You better not. I like this one." "What makes him different from the others?" She smiled, a private smile that suggested depths he wasn't privy to. "He listens, really listens, not just waiting for his turn to talk. He asks questions about my life, about the ranch, about you. He doesn't try to diminish what we have here or suggest I should want something different. He just wants to understand." That's a good quality in a man. You'd like him. He reminds me of you in some ways. Quiet, competent, doesn't waste words. But he laughs more easily than you do. Sees humor in things. I see humor in things. "Caleb, you smile maybe twice a week, and one of those is usually at something I've said." "I smile on the inside." She laughed, the sound filling the kitchen with warmth. "Well, Daniel smiles on the outside. It's nice." Sunday arrived with the kind of perfect autumn weather that made New Mexico feel like paradise. Cool but not cold, bright but not harsh. the air carrying the smell of sage and distance. Lily May had been cooking since dawn, preparing a meal that involved more dishes than they'd used in months. Caleb had cleaned up, put on his good shirt, and was trying not to pace like a nervous father, though that's exactly what he was. Daniel Crawford arrived precisely on time, riding a decent horse and carrying flowers for Lily May, which earned him points in Caleb's internal ledger. He was younger than Caleb expected, maybe 25, with dark hair and an open, honest face. When he dismounted and offered his hand, his grip was firm but not aggressive. "Mr. Holt, thank you for having me. Lily May's told me a lot about you." "All good, I hope." "Nothing but?" Daniel glanced at Lily May, who was watching this exchange with barely concealed anxiety. "She speaks of you with a great deal of respect and affection." "That's more than I deserve, but I appreciate it nonetheless. Come inside. Dinner's nearly ready." The meal was easier than Caleb anticipated. Daniel proved to be good company. Articulate but not pretentious, interested in the ranch without romanticizing it, respectful of the relationship between Caleb and Lily May without being deferential to the point of annoyance. "Lily May mentioned you're starting a teaching position," Daniel said as they worked through the main course. "That's admirable work." "She'll be good at it," Caleb said. "She's patient and clear in her explanations. Lord knows she's taught me plenty over the years." "Like what?" Daniel asked, genuinely curious. "Like how to see past my own stubbornness. Like how to let people in even when it's scary. Like how family is something you build, not something you're born with." Lily May's eyes met his across the table, shining with emotion. Daniel noticed the exchange and smiled. "I hope to build something like that someday," he said. "A family based on choice and respect, not just tradition." "You have family?" Caleb asked. "My parents are in Colorado, sister in California. We write, but we're not close. Different values, different priorities. They wanted me to take over my father's mercantile business. I wanted to work with my hands, build things. That didn't sit well with them." "So you understand something about choosing your own path?" "I do. And I understand how valuable it is when someone supports that choice instead of fighting it." The evening progressed through dinner and into coffee and dessert, conversation flowing naturally. Caleb watched Daniel interact with Lily May, the way he listened when she spoke, the way he asked follow-up questions that showed he was actually paying attention, the way he touched her hand briefly when passing her the sugar bowl, casual affection that spoke of comfort between them. After dinner, while Lily May was clearing dishes, Daniel asked if he could speak with Caleb privately. They stepped out onto the porch, the evening air cool and still. "Mr. Holt," Daniel began, his voice serious, "I want to be direct with you. My intentions toward Lily May are honorable and serious. I'd like to court her properly, with your blessing." "You're asking my permission?" "I'm asking for your support. Lily May's made it clear you're the most important person in her life, that your opinion matters more than anyone else's. I won't proceed without knowing you're comfortable with this." Caleb appreciated the honesty, even as part of him wanted to say no, wanted to keep Lily May here where he could protect her from disappointment and heartbreak. But that wasn't fair to her, and it wasn't what she needed. "What are your plans?" Caleb asked. "For the future?" "I'm building a carpentry business in Socorro. It's doing well, growing steadily. Within a year or two, I'll be able to afford a house, something substantial. I want to build a life there, but I also understand Lily May has commitments here, to you and to this ranch. I'm not asking her to choose between us. I'm willing to work around her obligations, to make room for the life she already has while building something new together." "And if I said no? If I told you to stay away from her?" Daniel met his eyes steadily. "I'd respect your wishes, though it would hurt. But Mr. Holt, I think you know Lily May well enough to know she makes her own choices. If you said no and she wanted to continue seeing me anyway, we'd have a problem. Better if we're all in agreement from the start." The answer was perfect, respectful of Caleb's position but not subservient, acknowledging Lily May's autonomy while understanding the importance of family harmony. This was a man who'd thought through the complexities, who understood what he was stepping into. "You have my blessing," Caleb said. "But Daniel, understand something. That girl in there, she's been through more than most people face in a lifetime. She's strong because she's had to be, but that doesn't mean she's not vulnerable. If you hurt her, if you make promises you can't keep, if you treat her as anything less than the remarkable person she is, you'll have my head on a platter, Daniel finished, a slight smile playing at his lips. I understand, Mr. Holt, and I promise you, I have no intention of hurting her. I've never met anyone like Lily May. She's brilliant and brave and kind, and I consider it a privilege just to know her, much less to court her. Caleb nodded, satisfied. Then we understand each other. They returned inside to find Lily May standing by the window, pretending she hadn't been watching them through the glass. Daniel caught her hand as he passed, squeezing it gently, and the smile that lit her face told Caleb everything he needed to know about her feelings. The evening ended with Daniel's departure and promises to return soon. After he'd ridden off into the darkness, Lily May turned to Caleb with an expression that was equal parts hopeful and anxious. Well, she asked. What do you think? I think he's a good man. I think he sees you clearly and values what he sees. I think you could do a lot worse. That's high praise from you. It is. But Lily May, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Always. Are you moving toward this, toward Daniel, toward teaching, toward a life in Socorro, because it's what you want? Or because you think it's what you're supposed to want? Because there's a difference. She considered the question seriously, not rushing to answer. It's what I want. The teaching especially. That's something I've wanted since I was 12, since you first taught me to really read. And I realized what a gift that was. I want to give that gift to other children. And Daniel, she paused, searching for words. He makes me happy in a way that's separate from obligation or gratitude. He makes me laugh. He challenges me to think differently. And when I'm with him, I'm not the girl who was abandoned or the girl who got lucky. I'm just Lily May, and that's enough. Then that's all I need to know. You have my blessing and my support. She crossed the room and hugged him, something she still did rarely enough that it felt significant. Thank you for everything, for 16 years of patience and teaching and love, for giving me a foundation solid enough to build on, for not making me choose between you and my own life. You never have to choose, Lily May. This ranch, this home, it's yours as long as you want it. Whether you're here every day or just on weekends or just on holidays, the door's always open. She pulled back, wiping her eyes. I know. That's what makes leaving possible, knowing I can always come home. The months that followed brought change layered upon change. They hired a young man named Thomas to help with the ranch work, a quiet fellow from Texas who knew cattle and didn't ask unnecessary questions. Caleb reduced the herd, sold off the older stock, kept only the breeding pairs and young steers that required minimal management. Lily May moved to Socorro to begin teaching, and the house felt cavernously empty those first few weeks. Caleb found himself cooking for one again, eating in silence, going days without hearing another human voice except Thomas's occasional greeting. But gradually he adjusted, found rhythms that worked, discovered that solitude at 63 was different from solitude at 43, less bitter, more contemplative. And Lily May came home every weekend, bursting through the door with stories about her students, about the challenges of managing a classroom of energetic children, about the satisfaction of watching comprehension dawn on a young face. She brought Daniel with her sometimes, and Caleb grew to genuinely like the younger man, appreciated his skill with repairs around the ranch, his easy conversation, his obvious devotion to Lily May. 2 years passed. Lily May flourished in her teaching, became respected in Socorro for her competence and compassion. Daniel's carpentry business thrived, and he built a house on the edge of town, modest but well-crafted, with large windows and a porch that caught the evening light. One Sunday in spring, they came to dinner with news written all over their faces. Before they could speak, Caleb held up his hand. Let me guess, you're engaged. Lily May laughed. How did you know? Because you're both practically glowing, and because I've been expecting it for months. About time, honestly. Daniel grinned. We wanted to tell you together, and to ask if you'd be willing to host the wedding here, at the ranch. Lily May says this is where she became herself, and she wants to make her vows in the place that gave her a foundation. Something in Caleb's chest cracked open, warm and painful. I'd be honored. The wedding took place on a June morning when the desert was at its most forgiving, the heat not yet oppressive, wildflowers blooming in unlikely places. Chairs were arranged in the yard, facing the mountains that had witnessed Caleb's entire adult life. The gathering was small: neighbors, a few friends from Socorro, Thomas and his new wife, the marshal who'd filed those first papers 16 years ago. Lily May wore a dress she'd made herself, simple but elegant, and carried flowers from the garden she'd tended since childhood. Daniel stood at the makeshift altar, looking nervous and proud in equal measure. And Caleb, in his good suit that still fit despite the years, walked Lily May down the aisle they'd created between chairs. "You ready for this?" he whispered as they walked. "More ready than I've ever been for anything. He's a good man. You chose well. I learned from the best." When they reached the altar, the minister asked who gave this woman in marriage, and Caleb spoke the words that needed speaking. "She gives herself, as she's always been free to do, but she does so with my blessing and my love." He took a seat in the front row and watched as Lily May and Daniel made promises to each other, promises about partnership and respect and choosing each other every day. The ceremony was brief, heartfelt, and when they were pronounced married, the small gathering erupted in applause. At the reception afterward, while people ate and talked and celebrated, Lily May found Caleb standing at the edge of the gathering, watching the happiness he'd helped make possible. "You all right?" she asked, slipping her arm through his. "I'm perfect. Today's a good day." "I keep thinking about that well, about how different things could have been if you'd ridden past, if you hadn't stopped. But I did stop, and you waited, and we found each other. Do you ever wonder about the randomness of it? How many things had to go exactly right for us to end up here?" Caleb considered this. "I used to, but I don't anymore. I think some things happen because they're supposed to, because the world occasionally gets it right. We were both waiting by wells. Yours was made of stone, mine was made of loneliness, and somehow, against all odds, we found each other. That's almost poetic for you." "Don't tell anyone. I have a reputation for being gruff." She laughed, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Thank you, Caleb, for stopping that day, for taking a chance on a scared little girl, for teaching me that family isn't about who leaves you, it's about who stays. Thank you for reminding me that staying matters, that showing up every day is its own kind of courage." They stood together watching the celebration, this man and woman who'd chosen each other 16 years ago and had kept choosing each other ever since, through changes and challenges and the ordinary miracle of building a life together. Eventually Daniel approached, offering his hand to Lily May for a dance. She took it, but looked back at Caleb with a smile that said everything: gratitude, love, and the promise that this new chapter didn't erase the old one, just added to it. As the afternoon wore into evening and guests began departing, Caleb found himself alone on the porch, watching the sun set over land he'd worked for 40 years. Thomas had the ranch well in hand. Lily May had built a life worth living. Daniel would care for her in ways Caleb no longer could. Everything was changing, had been changing for years. But standing there in the gathering dusk, Caleb didn't feel loss. He felt completion, the sense that a story begun by chance had found its proper ending, not in separation, but in transformation. The door opened behind him, and Lily May appeared, still in her wedding dress but barefoot now, her hair coming loose from its pins. "Everyone's gone," she said, "except Daniel. He's helping Thomas put away the chairs. Good man, that one. Doesn't mind work." "But Caleb, I need to tell you something." He turned to face her, reading concern in her expression. "What is it?" "Daniel and I have been talking about the future, about children, about what kind of life we want to build. And we've decided, well, we'd like to build it here. Not in Socorro, but here at the ranch." Caleb's heart kicked against his ribs. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Daniel can do carpentry anywhere. I can teach at the school in Albuquerque. It's not much farther than Socorro. And we want our children to grow up here, on this land, learning the things you taught me. We want to expand the house, add rooms for the family we're planning. We want to help you run the ranch, take over more of the work as you slow down. We want—" She stopped, emotion catching in her throat. "We want you to know you're not going to be alone, that we're not leaving you." For a moment, Caleb couldn't speak. The future he'd been imagining, solitary years declining slowly into old age, the ranch eventually sold to strangers, his life's work scattered to wind and memory. dissolved like morning fog. In its place stood something he hadn't dared hope for: continuity, family, the knowledge that what he'd built would persist beyond him. "You're sure?" he managed finally. "You're not doing this out of obligation?" "I'm doing it because this is home, because I want my children to learn about resilience and hard work and showing up from the same person who taught me. Because growing old happens to everyone, but growing old alone is a choice, and I'm choosing to make sure you don't." "What about Daniel? He's all right with this?" "It was his idea. He said he's been watching us together, watching the way we talk and work and exist in the same space, and he wants to be part of it, wants to learn from you while he still can." Caleb pulled her into a hug. This woman who'd been a frightened child when he found her, who'd grown into someone stronger and braver than he'd ever been. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "Thank you for choosing this, for choosing me." "You chose me first," she said. 16 years ago, by a well, when you could have kept writing. This is just me returning the favor." They stood together as the last light faded from the sky and stars began appearing in their ancient patterns. Behind them, the house that had sheltered their improbable family glowed warm with lamplight. Beyond them, the desert stretched endlessly, indifferent to human drama, but witness to it nonetheless. And on that porch, in that moment, Caleb Holt understood something fundamental about the nature of love and family and the choices that define us. He'd spent 40 years building walls against loneliness, convincing himself that self-sufficiency was strength. Then a child had appeared by a well, and those walls had crumbled, and he discovered that the strongest thing a person could do was let someone in. Lily Mae had taught him that family wasn't about blood or convention, but about daily choices, about showing up and staying present and believing that two broken people could create something whole. She'd taught him that the opposite of abandonment wasn't just presence, it was commitment, the willingness to keep choosing someone even when it would be easier not to. And now, on her wedding day, she was choosing him again, choosing to build her future around his present, to weave her new family into the fabric of the old one, to make sure that the man who'd stopped at a well 16 years ago wouldn't end his days alone. The years that followed brought their own joys and challenges. Lily Mae and Daniel expanded the house, adding rooms for the children who came, first a boy they named Caleb, then twin girls who filled the ranch with laughter. Thomas stayed on, eventually buying a small piece of land adjacent to the ranch, becoming more friend than employee. Caleb aged, as all people do. His joints complained more loudly, his energy waned earlier in the day, his memory occasionally faltered. But he was never alone. There were always children underfoot, always voices in the house, always someone who needed his advice or his stories or simply his presence. He taught young Caleb to ride, to read cattle signs, to understand the language of the land. He taught the girls to gather eggs, to identify edible plants, to find humor in hardship. And in teaching them, he discovered that the things he'd learned by surviving could be transformed into wisdom worth passing on. On his 75th birthday, surrounded by family in the house he'd built 45 years earlier, Caleb looked around at the faces gathered to celebrate. Lily Mae grown into middle age, but still carrying that spark of fierce determination. Daniel now graying at the temples, but steady as ever. The children growing into people of substance and character. Thomas and his family completing the circle. "Make a wish," Lily Mae said, lighting candles on a cake the children had decorated with enthusiastic chaos. Caleb looked at her, at the life they'd built from the rubble of abandonment and loneliness, and shook his head. "I've got nothing left to wish for. Everything I needed, I found." "Then wish for more of the same," she said, her eyes bright. "More days like this, more time together." So he did. He closed his eyes and wished for exactly what he had. This family, this place, this sense of having mattered to people who mattered to him. And when he blew out the candles, when the children cheered and the cake was cut and distributed, he felt something he'd spent most of his life believing was impossible. He felt complete. 2 years later, on a winter morning when frost painted the desert silver, Caleb Holt died peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by the family who'd chosen him as surely as he'd chosen them. Lily Mae found him at dawn, his face peaceful, his hands still warm, his presence lingering in the room like a blessing. She wept, as did Daniel and the children and everyone who'd known him. But underneath the grief was gratitude, The knowledge that he'd lived long enough to see the fruits of the seeds he'd planted, to know beyond doubt that he'd mattered, that his choice to stop at a well 16 years ago had rippled forward in ways that would persist long after he was gone. They buried him on the ranch, on a hill overlooking the land he'd worked and the house he'd built. The stone marking his grave was simple, bearing only his name and the dates of his life in a single line that Lily May had insisted upon. He stopped when others would have passed by. And the ranch continued. Lily May and Daniel ran it with the same careful stewardship Caleb had shown, teaching their children the lessons they'd learned about resilience and compassion and the importance of showing up. Young Caleb grew into a man who understood that strength meant making room for vulnerability, that family was something you built through daily choices, that the greatest gift you could give someone was to see them clearly and choose them anyway. Years later, when Lily May was an old woman herself, her grandchildren would ask about the stone well that still stood at the crossroads south of the ranch, weathered but enduring. And she would tell them the story, about a little girl who waited, about a lonely man who stopped, about how one moment of compassion had created ripples that spread across generations. Did they save each other? The grandchildren would ask, and Lily May would smile, remembering. No, she'd say. They chose each other, and then they kept choosing every day, even when it was hard. That's what family is, not rescue, but commitment, not saving, but staying. And somewhere in that answer, in the life she'd built and the legacy she carried forward, was everything that mattered. Not the dramatic gestures or the grand moments, but the quiet accumulation of days spent showing up, of love demonstrated through presence, of two people who'd found each other in the vast emptiness of the desert and decided that together was better than alone. The well still stands at the crossroads, a monument to chance and choice, to the random moments that alter the course of lives. Travelers still stop there for water, still rest in its shade, still move on toward their destinations without knowing the story the stones could tell. But if they listened closely, if they paid attention to the way the wind moves through sage and mesquite, they might hear something, not voices exactly, but an echo of truth. That loneliness isn't destiny. That family is something you build. That showing up matters. That one act of compassion can change everything. And that sometimes, when you're lost and waiting and hoping against hope that someone will come, the universe sends exactly the right person at exactly the right time. Not to rescue you, but to walk beside you. Not to solve everything, but to make the burden lighter by sharing it. That's what Caleb gave Lily May, and what she gave him in return. Not salvation, but companionship. Not answers, but presence. Not perfection, but something better. The messy, complicated, beautiful reality of choosing to love when love wasn't guaranteed, when hope felt foolish, when every reason said to protect yourself instead. They chose differently. They chose each other. And in that choosing, they created something that outlasted them both. A family built not on blood, but on commitment. Not on obligation, but on love freely given and gratefully received. The desert remembers. The well remembers. The ranch remembers. And in the memories of children and grandchildren and all those who came after, the story persists, a reminder that the greatest adventures aren't always about going somewhere new, but about finding someone worth staying for, and then having the courage to build a life together, one ordinary day at a time.